So, my talk is about the subject of forgiveness. I think we called it the power of forgiveness. So I want to start by assuming that we all agree, I think most people agree, that the qualities of love, kindness, compassion, these are qualities that everybody respects. Whether you're into meditation, mindfulness, spirituality or not, just in ordinary daily life, everybody is drawn to people who are kind. When we talk about people and we say, oh, he's a nice guy or she's a nice girl, we usually mean because they're generous, kind, forgiving, not wrapped up in themselves so much. So these qualities are something everybody respects. And then, of course, in the whole journey of meditation, mindfulness, spirituality, you could say that's the main point. The development of compassion, the development of a kind heart. I think we all have that. We all have the seed of that. Everybody knows that feeling of kindness and love and compassion. But as a meditator, we want to develop that. We want it to sort of spread beyond its limitations. One of the biggest limitations for all of us is that our compassion tends to be sort of conditional. You know, we help people, and it always happens that we help somebody, and then at some point, they do something, or they say something that we don't like, and what's the first thing that comes into our head? After all I've done for them, how could they? I mean, that's a very natural response that we all have, but it shows that our compassion is still not mature. It's still sort of bound up with ego and limitations. And as a mindfulness or meditation practitioner, we're trying to sort of expand beyond those limitations. We're trying to develop a more unconditional compassion. So, of course, within that comes training. Because the beautiful thing about meditation and mindfulness is that we understand that we can develop qualities in the mind. We can develop deeper qualities just through simple training. Whether you're into religion or not, it makes no difference. It's just the meditation is a science. It's the science of the inner mind. So whatever way you're practicing it, you're trying to develop a more open heart. So of course, within that, forgiveness is a major component. And if you really think about it seriously, it's true to say that in order to develop spiritually, we need people to be horrible to us. Otherwise, how are we going to develop true compassion? It's easy to be compassionate towards small, fluffy animals and children, and easy. But when those tests come, those obstacles, when we feel that people are pushing our buttons, winding us up, hurting us, harming us, whatever, then that's you could say that's where we meet our edge, and that's where the forgiveness training comes in. So in that sense, there could be a kind of gratitude. Oh, this person is giving me a chance to develop forgiveness. This person is my meditation aid. This person is helping my meditation. So if we can develop more of that attitude, then life becomes very different, doesn't it? Because we want to develop compassion, we want to develop kindness, partly because it helps others, but partly because it helps us. The more we explore our mind, the more we explore mindfulness, meditation, the more we discover that our selfishness is the very thing that makes us suffer. Because with our selfishness, when we all know what it's like to be selfish, and we know how it feels. When we're selfish, we get very wrapped up in our own problems. We get very absorbed in our own pain. it's almost as if our problems become bigger than they really are because we sort of put them under a microscope and we obsess about them a lot. And on the other side on the other side, when we become more open, generous, compassionate, then our problems are sort of in perspective. They become less important. So our own suffering sort of lightens through the development of a loving heart. And of course, within that, forgiveness is the key. So how are we going to train in forgiveness? Can we think about it as a training, not just a random thing that, you know how it feels when you forgive? It's such a relief. Such a relief, but can we train in that? Can we train and develop that? So I think there are two approaches, and I think both are important, and it's good if we can sort of think about both of these. I would call one of them would be through intelligence, and the other one is through wisdom. When I'm talking about intelligence, I'm talking about using our thoughts in a productive way, thinking about situations in a way that's helpful. And when I'm talking about wisdom, I'm talking about something more direct, more about working with the mind, working with awareness, looking at the mind. So I think both these approaches. So the intelligence approach is to look at the situations we find ourselves in, situations of conflict or situations where our forgiveness has been tested, and actually think about them more deeply. First of all, to think about the whole notion of gratitude. Gratitude that this person or this situation is giving me an opportunity. I want to meditate, I want to develop compassion, I want to develop love. This person is giving me a tool through which I can develop deeper forgiveness. In a way, just through thinking in that way about the person, you've already forgiven them. It's like you've forgiven before you've forgiven, just by seeing it as an opportunity or a teaching. Everything in life can be seen as a teaching or something that helps us grow. So that's one thing. Another thing, I think, is to think about the situation and think about how, I think this was mentioned earlier in one of the presentations, when somebody else is doing something we don't like, we don't really look at it from their point of view, do we? We look at it from our point of view. But compassion is all about connecting with the suffering of others, connecting with what's underneath. So when somebody is behaving towards me in a way I don't like, what is it that stops me forgiving? It's usually a feeling that they deliberately meant to hurt me. It's deliberate. We have this whole thing about deliberate and accidental, don't we? You know, if somebody steps on our foot accidentally, it's all right. But if they deliberately step on our foot, that's very different. So we make this differentiation. And yet, so what I'm saying is that when somebody is doing or saying something or has in the past done or said something that we feel wounded by, a major part of our resentment is built on a feeling that they meant it, it was deliberate, they planned it. And I think when you're a practitioner of mindfulness and meditation, you become more honest about your own weakness because you see the instability of your own mind. The most interesting thing is when you sit down to do mindfulness practice and you're told to be in the present moment, maybe you're told to observe your breathing or whatever technique, and then we find the mind just goes here, it goes there, it's very difficult. So we see the instability of our mind, or we see how our reactivity is so out of control, it just comes up. We don't ask for it. When we get stressed, when we get upset, when we get anxious, we don't sit around thinking, shall I get anxious now? Shall I get stressed? I think I'll try a bit of depression. We don't think like that. It just comes. And how often do we find ourselves in a situation where we do something or say something, and then afterwards we think, why did I say that? Why did I do that? Doesn't that show? That's not the talk of somebody who's in their right mind or somebody who's sort of in control of their mind. It shows that we have this deep level of reactivity that's very wild. And when our emotional pain takes over, we just react from it. It's a bit like vomiting. You can't stop yourself vomiting once it's, once it's happening. And we do and say things just because our emotion takes over. So, as a mindfulness and meditation practitioner, we start to see that about ourselves, and this helps us to then understand that others are also coming from that place. So this takes away the whole idea of he meant it. He deliberately said that. He deliberately did that. She deliberately, she was out to get me. We always think people are out to get us. They're out to get me. But if we understand that it's coming from confusion, it's coming from emotional pain, what we're trying to do here is look at the suffering underneath what's going on. And this helps us to soften that hard edge of resentment that really cuts into our heart. Do you know how it feels, that sharpness? It softens when we think, oh, really, they couldn't help themselves. They didn't really mean it. Maybe it's quite a radical thing to say, but nobody really means it. Even the person who does things and seems so calculating about it, really planning it and sort of, cold and calculating, still they are acting from a place of confusion. And we know this because we know we do it too. So I think the starting point for forgiveness is to look at how we also make mistakes. We also lose control. And then we can understand that that's how the others are as well. And this kind of softens up the situation. So we're talking about the intelligence approach, which means through thinking differently about the situation, thinking, I'm grateful, there's a chance, there's an opportunity here, this is, how, I always think that meditation's like, it's exercise for the mind, isn't it? So you know how when you go to the gym, you lift weights, you want to put more weights on your weightlifting machine to get a bigger stretch. So in the same way with meditation, you could say the obstacles and difficulties of life are like loading more weights onto the machine, so you get more, more mindfulness, a deeper mindfulness, the deeper the problem. And this is something that everybody involved in meditation, mindfulness, religion, non-religion, whatever, everybody, we have to be careful that we don't fall into a trap of just looking for a good time. Thinking that I'm doing my practice so that I can just feel great. I'm trying to feel a kind of a disconnected bliss. If we're looking for that, then of course life's problems become a real intrusion into that, and the mindfulness practitioner becomes actually quite scared of life. But if you are practicing mindfulness or meditation with a feeling that you want the obstacles of life, the difficulties of life, are a bit like compost. What's compost made from? It's made from all the really disgusting stuff that you normally throw away. But if you put it on your field, it helps the field to grow. So the difficulties of life are like compost in the field of awakening. So that brings a feeling of gratitude. That could bring a feeling of being grateful for everything, being grateful to everybody. So that was the first thing I mentioned. The second thing I mentioned was our lack of forgiveness comes because we judge and we assume and we make a decision that this person meant to harm me, therefore I can't forgive them. So we need to kind of soften that down by understanding the suffering, the deep, inherent suffering that is there in people's minds that make them do what they do. So I think those are a few little points that we can use on the sort of intelligence side. Then the wisdom side. The wisdom side is more through the direct training in meditation. And this is about learning how to have a different relationship, different kind of relationship with our thoughts and emotions. So I think it's true to say that we all have a kind of war going on in our head, or mind, or whatever you want to call it. That war is how when there are thoughts or emotions, we either try to suppress them, push them away, or we really get into them and we sort of develop them. We don't learn maybe how just to leave them alone and let them breathe, let them just be. And I think meditation is all about that. It's all about learning to just leave the mind alone. Maybe this could be referred to, you could describe this as a training in unconditional love. Maybe that's an interesting way to describe meditation. Because what do we mean by unconditional love? Let's think of it in terms of people. When you have unconditional love, it's you just love somebody the way they are. You don't want to change them. You don't need to change them, just the way they are. As soon as you try and change them, you've stopped loving them. And that, as we know, is the downfall in every relationship. So transpose that to how we deal with our mind. How are we towards our emotions? How are we towards our thoughts? Are we attacking our thoughts? Are we attacking our emotions? What would it mean to have unconditional love towards our thoughts and emotions? It would mean just to leave them alone. Just let them be. And this is the challenge of every meditator, because so many meditators fall into the trap of sitting there and trying to kind of get rid of their thoughts. They want to go blank. They think they have to clear their mind or empty their mind. A lot of people meditate like that, thinking, I have to clear or empty. And of course, it's impossible, because the more you try and push your thoughts away, the worse they get. And also, if that really is what meditation is about, there are easier ways to achieve it. You just have to knock your head against a wall until you're unconscious. Or take an anesthetic. Anesthesia could become a path to enlightenment, if that's what it is, about just blank. But of course it isn't. We know that meditation is it's not about blanking or removing or sort of killing the thoughts or killing the emotions. It's about developing a different way of relating to them. So maybe we're watching our breathing. That's a technique many people do. We're observing our breathing. And then, of course, the mind wanders. And then we at some point, could take a while, but at some point we notice our mind has wandered. Then what do? That moment of noticing that the mind has wandered, that moment is a crucial moment in the meditation. How we deal with that moment. Because many people see that moment as a moment of failure. You know what I mean? You're sitting there nicely doing your practice, and then suddenly you realize you were writing an email in your head. You realize that, and you feel you lost it. There's a kind of tension. Oh, I blew it. So our meditation becomes a constant stringing together of those moments of tension. That's not good. What we want to do, instead of seeing that moment as a moment of failure, is see it as a moment of success. Because we've had a recognition that our mind has wandered. It's a moment of awareness. And so all we have to do is be aware our mind wandered and then come back to the present moment. And whatever you're using, you might be using breath, sound, visualization, or no object whatsoever, but the idea is you're coming back to the present moment. So this way we are not attacking ourselves for thinking and feeling, we're just letting it be and returning. Normally, we either try and push it away, or we go for a kind of ride in it, don't we? We jump on the thought and go surfing on it. And that's also it's almost a kind of aggression, because we're basically saying this thought is not good enough the way it is, I need more of it. I need 2 of them or 3 of them. It's like somebody put a slice of chocolate cake in front of you, and you say, well, actually, I'd like 2, please. Or I'd like cream on top and a sparkler. It's not okay the way it is, I need more of it. And that's what we're doing with our thoughts and emotions all the time, is either pushing them down or sort of indulging them and going with them. So instead, the middle way approach is just to leave them alone. Just leave it alone and come back to the breath. This is helping us train in a kind of unconditional acceptance. And I think that is the root of forgiveness. Because if we can develop that attitude towards our own mind, then this will naturally relate to how we feel about others. What is it that stops us forgiving? We're talking about how can we forgive. So what is it that stops us forgiving? It's that judgment, that feeling of unable to accept the situation, unable to accept the person. If we're training instead in acceptance, if acceptance becomes our way of training, then surely that's going to come out in how we deal with others, how we think about others. So the forgiveness will come more naturally when we learn to, you could say, make friends with our own mind. I always like to think that meditation is like falling in love with your own mind. And for many meditators, it's quite a struggle. Many people come to classes and they say it's a real struggle, I can't meditate. And that's because they're trying to destroy their own mind. They're trying to get rid of the thoughts, they're trying to push them away, because they've got some idea somewhere that meditation is like going into a trance or going blank. But instead, if we learn a different, more creative way of relating to our thoughts and emotions through this, just leaving them alone, letting them be, don't need to judge them, just come back to the breath, or come back to the present moment, then we could say we're really making friends. So then from that friendship, from that love, comes a kind of inner gentleness, a feeling of sort of being comfortable in your own skin. If you're comfortable in your own skin, you're more comfortable about others. So forgiveness can come from there. So what I've tried to share with you today is some of the Buddhist teachings, but of course you don't have to become a Buddhist to practice them, because I always say, well, nobody owns the mind. Buddhism doesn't own the mind. Meditation isn't the property of any one religion or tradition over another, because meditation is about the inner journey of looking at our mind. But what I've tried to do today is share some of those teachings about forgiveness, and particularly through these two methods, which I think can be practiced together. The method of intelligent thinking and the method of deep looking. More like how we directly relate to our mind. So thank you for listening.